Finally, we come to part 2 of the 9600 series, and you may want to go skim the last video on this. I'll try to remember to link it in the description for kind of where we started with this machine, because I didn't really do much with it at that point in time because I didn't have a plan really for upgrading this thing. I knew kind of what I wanted to do, but I never had the resources to kind of execute on it. Well, once again, thanks to channel supporter Garth Beagle for making a lot of this so possible, because this machine would not be as awesome as it is without his help and giving me a lot of parts to do it. And on top of that, I really just want to thank the community as a whole, because I embarked on a kind of weird journey to upgrade this thing, and it kind of led me to some interesting places, and we'll go into those as we get into it. But a small hint you may be able to see from the front is that the CD-ROM drive is black, and we'll get more into that in a moment here. But I've upgraded the absolute bejesus out of this thing, and we're going to take a look at it in just a moment. Now we're going to go back over the hardware before we get back into the software, and I would actually be using a screen recording to go into the software bit, but unfortunately my VGA splitter is not due to arrive till later, and well, given how my week is going, this is going to be the last time I can film until next week. So I kind of just want to get this done and get it out there, so we're going to be doing camera in front of the monitor for just a little bit longer here. So, let's get into the inside of this machine. So now we need to get the side panel off, and thankfully we just do that by pressing this green button up here and pulling forward, and it feels like you're going to break the machine, but thankfully that is not the case. So first off, we have a modification right here. As we can see, I've made a little modification to the fan cable here so that I can put any 3-pin fan on this back door, or this side door, I should say, because, well, I didn't like the stock fan in there. It was kind of loud, and that actually kind of gives it a neat little blue glow out of the grill, which is really cool looking. And I know that it's not really era appropriate, but I don't really care. This machine is meant to just be a ridiculously spec'd out 9600. And I know it's not fully spec'd out just yet, but compared to what I had when this machine was still somewhat relevant, this is amazing. And this is really meant to pay homage to the old machine that I did have, which was a PowerMac 9500. This is using a Tsunami board as opposed to a Kansas board, because this is a 9600/200. It is using the lesser board, which becomes relevant in a minute when we start talking about the upgrades. So let's get a little bit closer and prop open the side door, and we'll talk about that. With these two little levers flipped, we can then prop it open like a hood, which is kind of cool in a way. I'm going to use a can of wasabi peas to kind of make that happen. Oh, right. I should have enough length on it to get this all the way up. Yep, there we go. Perfect. Well, watch me forget to reconnect the SATA card when I'm done. But yeah, we have the machine's entrails kind of all out here for viewing. And yeah, so let's get in a little bit closer here. So here we are on the inside looking down at the upgrade cards. And, well, you can see I've secured my place in hell with one of these. Yeah, funny about that thing, because, you know, the community drama surrounding it and such, which I'm going to touch on very briefly, but only very briefly because, again, I'm kind of over the drama at this point. But it's just kind of funny that this was a very recent acquisition and it's still called an Azul SCSI. They actually tried to tape over the name of the card, which I thought was hilarious at first, but then it kind of made sense at a later time, because I'm sure the SCSI to SD folks, which are the same people behind the Zulu SCSI, they ordered a bunch of these PCBs, and I'm pretty sure instead of, you know, just throwing them away, they're just going to sell them off anyway and not be wasteful, which, you know, is a good thing, because e-waste kind of sucks, and the less of it, the better. But I just still found it kind of funny, and now Garth can't lord the fact that he has a first edition of Zulu SCSI over me, because I have one too, and I kid. Garth is a really good, awesome person, and any joke I make at his expense is all in good fun, as I'm sure he'll understand. And if not, well, I have about 10 minutes before he ends up in my house to kill me. Anyway, beside the point, yeah, I have one of these because, as you can probably see by this cable just hanging here, I have a SATA card in here, and that was part of the strange journey that I was on to figure that all out. And in case that failed, I wanted to make sure I had my bases covered because as much as I love the blue SCSI, which is just hanging out down here, it is just not fast enough for these modern Power Macs. It's a good solution, and if my goal was just to get this machine up and running for as little cost as possible, it's still a good solution. In fact, up until recently, I still use these to run 7.6 on here, because for something like that, for such a lightweight OS, it's actually pretty fast. It's not that bad. But when we're talking about OSs like OS 8.1 or 8.6, which is what I want to ideally run, and what I'm currently running for the most part, that's when it starts to really feel the limits of what it can do. Now, long-time channel supporter, because he was the original person who donated something to me way back when I got my Quicksilver, he reached out to me and said, hey, I've got a GeForce 4 Ti that you can have for your Quicksilver, and that card is still working just great in my MDD as we speak. But Justin D. Morgan, throwing a shout out to him, because when I was in the middle of all this storage nonsense, he said, hey, if you want to evaluate, I'll send you one of these. This is a F4 blue SCSI based on a black pill, which is this little module here, and he gave me one of these to try out and send back when I'm done with it. And I'm very thankful, because it allowed me to actually really make a comprehensive benchmark of which SCSI solutions perform better, or how they work in these machines, which is very awesome and something I never thought I'd ever be able to do. I'm very thankful to the people who stepped up and said, hey, I'll loan you something to evaluate that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get yourself. And it really helped kind of get things in order for this machine and figure out what I can actually do and what I can't do. Anyway, we're getting a little into this, so let's start talking about the upgrade cards that I've got into this thing. Now, I didn't think I'd ever load this thing full, but we can see I'm kind of getting there. So from the bottom, you kind of can't see it because it's obscured by this cable and card on top of it, but we have a 2-port Opti Firelink USB card, and it's just a holdover from the PowerMac 6500, because I had that card in that computer to kind of make getting files over to it easier, because that computer does not have a network port on it, so trying to get files to it over anything else is kind of cumbersome. Now, thankfully, there is a product that allows that to happen easier, which is the DP25 Blue SCSI, that acts like basically a USB drive for SCSI ports, but without the hot plugging capabilities. And in fact, the Zulu SCSI can also do that as well if I add a port to it, which I probably am going to do at some point. But getting files on and off it was not a fun time, and I would have to actually use a old Mac to get files on and off the images, because, well, my modern MacBook doesn't support HFS anymore. Good luck, I guess. And I'm sure there might be a way to add support for HFS, but given the weird architecture of the M1 and how macOS is kind of becoming more and more locked down as time goes on, I don't anticipate it's going to work very well. So really being able to just get stuff over to it without having to involve my modern Mac or involve it very minimally, yeah, that's really the desired outcome. Up above that, we have another USB and FireWire card. Now, unfortunately, the FireWire doesn't really work, because in this old Mac, on not classic Mac OS, the FireWire portion isn't really recognized, which is kind of unfortunate, but what can you do? The USB part does actually work very well, and despite it being USB 1.1, well, I think it's actually a USB 2.0 card, but in classic Mac OS, it's scaled down to 1.1. It pulls some pretty respectable speeds even then, and it's much faster than the Opti Firelink card. I may actually get rid of the Firelink card, because 4 USB ports, we have 3 on the outside and 1 internal, is more than good enough for this machine, I feel. Above that, we have a blank slot, and then above that, we have this big old SCSI card here. This is an Ado Express PCI Pro, I believe it's called, and I got this from Garth because we were having a lot of trouble with the Zulu SCSI again. So the Zulu SCSI does not work very well, if at all, on the 9600's internal bus. And that was kind of a big old buzzkill, because I really wanted that to work just in case the SATA stuff ended up blowing up in my face. So Garth had an extra SCSI card, and he handed it off to me, and this can actually get full SCSI 2 speeds. I believe it also has one of those 60-pin connectors. I forget I think it's just wide SCSI. I could be wrong. I'm really not up to date on my SCSI terminology, but it has one of those connectors on it, and it also has one externally. But we have standard 50-pin SCSI 2, and with that card and the Zulu SCSI, it was able to get about 3.5 megabytes write and 7.5 megabytes read, which is pretty good for SCSI 2, which I believe tops out at 10 megabytes a second. That was going to be my backup plan if SATA didn't work, but clearly, as we can see by the presence of a SATA card in here, things went okay. So up above that, which you may not be able to see because the video card is slightly obscuring it, we do have a SATA card in here. That is a Silicon Image SIL 3112 based SATA card. That was a journey and a half because I sold off my iBook because unfortunately the display backlight started going out on that thing, and given how much of a pain those things are to work on, I decided I just did not want to deal with it. So I sold it off to somebody, one of my awesome Twitter followers, and put that money into getting the SATA project done. And I initially was just going to buy a pre-flashed card, but then I got in contact with DOSDude1 and he said, no, we can do this cheaper and we will do this cheaper. So he found a SATA card that would work, an SIL 3112 based card from StarTech on eBay, which was awesome. It was a little bit more expensive than the generic Chinese ones, but it was also in the US, so it would get here within a couple days rather than a couple weeks. So we bought that, and it was weird because it was a card that had a SATA port mounted externally. And I don't mean eSATA, I meant original, like, actual SATA. Almost like you'd run an internal drive externally for some reason. Maybe this was before eSATA and that's how it connected. I don't know why that would be, but I don't remember that far back at the moment. So if someone wants to jump in and kind of shed some insight on that, feel free to do so. The adventure started when I got the card in EEPROM, and I didn't realize that we actually need a very specific EEPROM for this to work. And I've done a whole big write-up about this over at Tinker Different, which again, I will link in the description, about my trials with this whole thing. But yeah, we need to get the specific EEPROM for this card. I eventually did. I got it on there, I flashed it, and it's all good now. So thankfully, we do have working SATA. But there was one more little snag. That externally mounted port was actually just doing nothing for me. I didn't have any use for it. So what I opted to do was desolder it and actually move it inside the card. And we can kind of see in there, and you can see that SATA port just right there pointing outward towards us. That's the one I soldered in from the outside. As you can see, I actually did apply some tape to the back here to block off the now vacant port. But yeah, now we have two SATA ports on the interior of the machine, and it works lovely, as you can see by the presence of two SATA cables. Up from that, we have the video card, as you probably just saw, and this was a very recent upgrade, again, provided to me by Garth Beagle, who, again, very awesome channel supporter. I owe everything to him for the most part. He gave me this Radeon 7000 because he got it out of a PowerMac G4, I believe, that came through his hands, and he had no use for it, so he just handed it off to me, and it works beautifully in this machine. I previously had a Rage 128 that was kind of problematic insofar that it would not work very well if the PRAM was reset in this machine. So what would happen with the Rage 128 is if the PRAM is reset, the machine would no longer boot. It would just hang the machine every time. What I would then have to do is grab the original video card, which was an IMX twin turbo, I believe, put it in here alongside the Rage 128, and it would then allow it to boot. I would have to boot both in tandem and then shut it down, and then I could pull the twin turbo back out of the machine, and then the Rage 128 would work perfectly fine. Not sure why that was. Maybe it's a video BIOS problem with these machines. I'm not sure why, but that was one of the things I had to do, and it got really annoying. The Radeon 7000, however, if the PRAM is reset, it'll just boot headless, as in there'll be no video, but the machine will continue booting perfectly fine. At that point, you could go over to the keyboard, hit the power key, hit the enter key, and shut the machine down and reboot it, and then it'll come up perfectly fine. So very much a better thing all around for this system without having to deal with the Rage 128 being weird. So up from that, we have the big cheese of the whole upgrade situation. We have the G3 processor. This is very interesting because I got into a very, very deep rabbit hole on this. Is a max power G3 from Neurotech, 400 megahertz, and it's very awesome, and I'm currently tentatively loaning it from Garth. And depending on how things perform, because I do have a G3 upgrade coming that is actually mine, which is an Interwear V-Power 366, I believe. Depending on how things go, he says I could keep this card and just give him the Interwear card. Now, why that would be is because the 9600 has a weird kind of quirk with G3 upgrade cards. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is a Tsunami 9600, not a Kansas 9600, and the Kansas board has some modifications, specifically with the ROM, which I believe is right here in these 4 chips, and the L2 cache, which is these chips right down here. On the Kansas board, those chips, the L2 cache, are gone, and that's because the Kansas boards let the CPU L2 cache kind of run the show. On the Tsunami boards, the motherboard L2 cache is running the show, and in the case of a lot of G3 upgrades, the L2 cache will actually take over for the G3's L2 cache, and so the cache on the card will actually be kind of shuffled off as L3 cache, while the slower motherboard cache will become the actual L2 cache. It's really annoying, and in the case of Newertech, their drivers actually kind of do an end run around this and allow the card's L2 cache to work if the motherboard L2 cache is inferior, which in this case it is. So I don't have to do any modifications, and that's kind of why Garth said, hey, if the max power works better in that machine, feel free to use that and just give me the Interwear card, because I'm not sure if the Interwear card has any drivers. I've not found any for this machine. And if it does, I'm not sure if they address that issue. The other fun issue is speculative multitasking, which I cannot pronounce that word for the life of me, so I do apologize. However, speculative multitasking is kind of bugged on the ROM of the Tsunami boards. This becomes a problem because the G3 very heavily relies on that. So you're going to get a performance hit if a fix is not implemented, and I believe the Newertech cards actually do have a fix implemented for that in hardware, if I remember correctly. Sonic cards try to fix it in software, if I remember, and I'm not sure if the Interwear cards have a fix implemented at all. Apparently they're supposed to. The Interwear cards are so unknown that I can't find any information on them, so I'm a little bit worried, but hopefully things are going to work out. Again, Garth says so long as I give him back a G3 processor for his project, he doesn't care which one he gets back at this point. He wants me to take the one that works best in the system. So again, thanks to him for making this possible, and hopefully we're going to have an answer on that relatively soon. I still have yet to get that processor. I need to actually go talk to the person who has it and arrange a date I can go meet them to go pick it up. But yeah, anyway, moving right up here, we can see I have loaded this thing with RAM. Again, another contribution from Garth. I originally had 128 megs in this thing, and I pulled that in from all of my machines to take the same RAM, and he gave me another 128 very recently alongside the Radeon 7000. So, very awesome contribution. Very happy about that. So this machine is no longer struggling for RAM, because I remember when I was trying to run Unreal on this thing, it actually requires about 100 megabytes of RAM. macOS 8.6 uses about 30 megabytes onto itself, so you can kind of understand here that 100 plus 30 is more than 128, so we were kind of starting to hit virtual memory territory there, and that kind of brings with it a fairly hefty performance drop. Alright, well, we're done looking at this part, so let's go ahead and put the hatch back down and look at the drives. Alright, so everything's a bit of a mess in here, but I've tried my best. So, we have some interesting drive setups here. What I ended up doing with this is I put the zip drive on an adapter here, because the stock bird connector coming off this power supply is just short enough to make it to the zip drive. So if anything needed to get around there, it was just so tight and ran the risk of breaking something that I didn't want to do that. So I just switched to an adapter to give it some slack. But we also have a couple of interesting drives in here. So right here in this bay here, we have a 1 terabyte 7200 RPM SATA drive. And I know some are thinking, well, why didn't you go with an SSD? And kind of keeping the overkill nature of this build, number go up. I wanted to just give this thing a huge drive so I would never have to worry about storage ever again in this machine. And part of the reason behind that too is because rather than burning disks for everything, I want to be able to just have everything as an ISO on this machine, because there is a utility that allows you to just mount those ISOs as drives, so you don't have to worry about sticking a disk in the drive all the time and having to deal with all that wonderful stuff. So this way I have plenty of storage to keep a collection of ISOs on this machine that I can just mount at will. I don't have to worry about it too much. So we have the aforementioned zip drive up there, And then you may notice the optical drive looked a bit weird, and it kind of is, because we are running a SATA optical drive in here as well, and short of audio CDs not working because the 4-pin audio connector can't connect to this drive, it works just as well as the SCSI drive that was already in here. I can boot from the drive, I can install Mac OS from it, I can install whatever I want from it, and it works perfectly fine. So, very awesome, and it actually allows me to not have to use the SCSI drive, which actually does work, but those drives were getting harder and harder to find in working condition by the day. So nice that I can preserve it, put it aside, and not have to worry about it, and I can just use modern drives in this machine that are a dime a dozen right now. So yeah, I eventually want to grab the hard drive and put it up in here, which is where the hard drive is supposed to go. And I realize I'm pointing at something you guys can't see, but the hard drive is supposed to mount up here. And eventually I do want to get the hard drive up there, but I don't have a long enough SATA cable at the moment to do that. So that's something on the docket, but for right now, this is kind of it. So let's go ahead and get this thing sealed back up and start it right up. Alright, so I made the room dark because I kind of want to show this off real quick. But let's go ahead and boot this thing up with that cool little fan installed. And you can just see a subtle blue glow coming off the PowerMac 9600. I just think that's really cool. So I'm going to keep the room dark, but one of the cool things that Garth taught me when screwing around with these machines is you can actually skip the RAM check, which takes quite a bit when you load this thing up with RAM, by doing the Max 3-finger salute, which is command, control, and power to reboot the machine. However, since kind of changing aspects here, the machine completed the RAM check, so we don't have to worry about that so much. And here we are booting right off that 1TB hard drive, and we'll kind of go into how it's set up in just a moment here. So I do already have a disk in the drive. However, it's not bootable because for some reason my Mac OS 9 disks never are. So I'm going to go ahead and throw in an actual bootable disk. But first, we're going to let this thing boot up. Now, as you may be able to see, I do have a host of OSs installed on this thing, going back to even 7.6. Now, for some odd reason, 7.6 does not really get along with the G3 card in here. So it's kind of there as a novelty. Like, it'll boot up sometimes, but a lot of the times, for whatever reason, it'll throw a bus error. And I can only think it's the G3 card because I've tried it with everything else, and that's the one thing that just seems to trip it out. The Radeon 7000, shockingly, does work in OS 7. I've actually installed the driver for it, so very neat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate the SATA CD-ROM drive real quick. I actually have a copy of Mac OS 7.6 on disk right here, which you might not be able to see because it's kind of dark in here because I want to keep the focus on the screen. I'm going to go ahead and put that in the drive as we speak, and you can hear from how quiet the drive is, it is indeed the SATA drive. I'm gonna let that spin up. Here it's seeking. There's our drive. So yeah, there's our SATA drive, and as we can see, if we go and click get info, it is on bus 2 ID 2. Which bus 2 in this machine is the SATA card, because the SATA card is just seen as another SCSI bus, weirdly enough. But I suppose that's how it works natively in this machine without any drivers. So let's go ahead and restart the machine. And I'm going to hold the C key down. And we'll watch as this SATA CD-ROM drive works just as well as the inbuilt CD-ROM drive on the SCSI bus. And there we go. As we can see, the Chicago typeface means we are booting into 7.6. I'm sure you can hear the seek noises, and the CD background kind of gives it away too. That worked very, very well. So no longer do we have to worry about a SCSI CD-ROM drive going out on us, because we can just put in a SATA drive with a compatible SATA controller, and it just works. It's awesome. There's our drives coming up, and of course, because they are HFS Plus formatted, we're gonna get the good old "where have my files gone," which is very nice. I thought that was kind of neat how Apple did that. It's like it's an incompatible format with earlier versions of Mac OS, but they don't just kind of leave you to find that out the hard way. They give you a little text file that says, hey, this is what's going on. You need to boot into a compatible OS to access your files. So let's go ahead and go back to startup disk here, and we're going to put this thing back on Mac OS 8.6 and restart. And there we go. So I'll see you guys once this thing is fully booted. Now that we're booted up, let's go ahead and give this thing a little bit of a tour. We're going to go to About This Computer, and we can see we have 256 megabytes of built-in memory. Virtual memory is on. I should probably be turning that off, but for now, I'll just leave it be. I have some games ready to install on this thing, but we're not going to worry about that at the moment. Going into Apple System Profiler, we can see more of what we just saw. We have QuickTime 6 on here because I fully updated the QuickTime installation. It's sees this is SCSI Bus 2 video memory LCD display. Interesting. LCD display, the Department of Redundancy department at Apple. Man, they've been at it. So as we can see, this is a 9600 is viewed here, but if I were to open this and say SCSI Director, it would see this machine is a 9500. We have no DVD decoder, so even though I have a DVD drive in here, it's not going to be able to really do anything. DVD is, as far as DVDs are concerned. I always love how it says Apple Extended Keyboard when, I mean, this is not an extended keyboard. This is a Apple design keyboard, which is kind of crappy, but it gets the job done. And I like the way the ADB ports are arranged on it versus my Apple Extended Keyboard, which I could well use, but because of the way the cables come out the side, it doesn't give me much room on a surface where I need all the room I can get. We do have network, and I am plugged in to my switch, which is kind of sitting behind the 9600. And if we go to devices, we can see all the fun stuff that I went over previously and how the machine kind of sees it. So we have all 3 USB buses here, which is weird that it sees 3 of them because I only have 2 installed, but you know, whatever, I guess. We have the zip drive here, which I do have a disc, so we can quickly kind of get that little ASMR out of the way because it's kind of cool. I have a bunch of OS 9 stuff on here. Let's go ahead and just check that. Oh, that funk is so satisfying. Anyway, so there was our zip drive right here on ID4. Then we have the hard drive on SCSI Bus 2, which is, again, the serial ATA card. And I do have this partitioned in many different ways, as we can see. I have 128 gigs allocated to each of these besides 7.6, which I just gave 4 gigabytes, because I know HFS can get a bit uppity with larger drive sizes. So I didn't want to take any chances there. So I gave all these 128, and then the rest of the storage is just here on this big glob of extra storage. Now what's funny is even though this is all HFS Plus, besides again 7.6, macOS 8.1 cannot see this extra storage bit here. It'll try to initialize it, which is really weird, but I guess whatever. Anyway, come down here. Here's our CD-ROM drive, HLDTST, which DVD plus RW. So we can see, yes, this is the SATA drive. Then we have our display card, which is, boom, RV100, so Radeon 7000. And then our display, which I'm running at 1024 by 768. Then we have our SCSI card and SCSI card, which, you know, one of these is an actual SCSI card and the other one is the SATA card. But as we can see, Ado Express PCI Pro. And then we have the open PCI slot and then the USB card. Actually, there's 2 USB cards. Maybe it's only seeing one of them. That's weird. That actually might be what's going on, which would be interesting. Also, of course, the floppy drive does work, as we'll see here very soon. These floppy drives are fairly reliable. I've not yet seen one fail on me, so that's pretty awesome. So let's go ahead and play some games and show this thing off a little bit. As I mentioned before, there is a utility called the Virtual CD DVD ROM utility. We're going to go ahead and run that. And this kind of works like Daemon Tools, if you remember that from way back, or how Power ISO and other similar utilities work today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to confirm that the ISO is where I want it. So I'm going to mount Unreal.iso. Actually, Unreal shouldn't need this. So I'm going to mount Unreal Tournament wherever it happens to be hiding. It's an install me, so I need to reorganize everything. We can go to extra storage, we can go to install me, and there it is. Like we just mounted it right there. So pretty awesome. And it just remains there even if you quit the utility. So let's go ahead and get some Unreal Tournament going. So I have it on this extra drive here. Go ahead and run it, see how well it does. Now what's interesting is Unreal Tournament actually runs better, I feel, on this machine than Unreal does, because Unreal, I think it's a little too old and doesn't know what the Radeon 7000 should be doing. So it runs all right, but it doesn't run as well, whereas Unreal Tournament knows, okay, I need to be using 3D acceleration. So I have a feeling that Unreal is running in software rendering mode, which is hampering performance even on a G3 processor. But we load in pretty quick here. There's our start animation, and we can start a practice session. Yeah, sure, we'll do good old facing worlds. I realize this looks kind of dark for you guys, so I do apologize. Hopefully you can kind of see everything here. Now, the thing that kind of sucks about this is I only have a 1-button mouse, and Unreal Tournament makes heavy use of Alt-Fire. So it's kind of a bit of a problem here, and that I can only Alt-Fire with the control button or control key. So I'm going to go ahead and just cap this flag real quick. They can't do jack about it. So I'm too fast. I've also got 200 health. There we go. That's how it's done. Of course, somebody's going to complain if I don't do the good old boop-a-doop, get in this corner. Hey, friends. That was a crappy kill, I'm sorry. But yeah, like, you need alt fire for this, and it's kind of unfortunate. So, a multi-button mouse, you really need to get your hands on one if you really want to use this for FPS gaming. But yeah, that's Unreal Tournament, running pretty well. Now, I believe I do not need a CD for Unreal because I have all the files already installed. Now, there's a trick with Unreal, if you're installing this for the first time on a Mac. You do not install it with game files. Just don't do it. What you need to do is you just install it without the game files at first, and then you just copy them over manually, because for some reason, if you tell it to install all the game files from the get-go, it flips out on you and won't start properly from then on out. So here we go. We're going to just load in. It should load up pretty fast because we're running a 7200 RPM SATA drive, which is supposed to get like at least like 50 megabytes a second, I would estimate, which is enough to saturate the PCI bus in this machine. So here we go. We are in Unreal. And we can see it's running in a decent clip, not 60 FPS, but pretty alright in this little flyover scene. So I'm going to go ahead and load a game, because I actually have one going already. Now some might ask, why would I have put a spinning Rust hard drive in here versus an SSD when SSDs are so cheap? And my response to that is, really, when we're talking about a machine of this vintage, a spinning Rust hard drive is going to saturate the machine all the same as an SSD. So for more storage and roughly same performance, I can just put in a spinning Rust hard drive. The better part about that too is because I have a million hard drives, but not many SSDs, I don't really have to worry about drive supply drying up. If this drive ever goes bad, I can just throw in a new one and be right off where I started. Of course, because this isn't running a SCSI imaging solution like the Blue SCSI or the Zulu SCSI, that does present a small issue in that it's kind of a little bit harder to back up this machine, but I don't think it'll be too much harder. As you can see, we have little friendo trying to kill us there. As we can see, the frame rates are dropping a little bit. And it's giving us stinger ammo, even though we don't have a stinger yet. But you kind of get the point. It's a little choppy, but it works. Man, remember when Team Sweeney was actually doing some cool stuff? I remember. And then, of course, we have good old Full Tilt, which is kind of fun to just get lost in. Now, Full Tilt, for the uninitiated, is the full game version of 3D Pinball Space Cadet, because as we can see, we have Space Cadet right here. We're going to run slow, because who the hell cares? We have so much horsepower at this moment. But as we can see here, once this fires up, or finishes firing up, because it takes a minute, there you go, full version of Space Cadet right there. It takes a minute to start, I'm not sure why that is. But it runs very, very well, as we can see here. And I can't play this too long, because I will get very distracted. But it works very, very well. I'm going to quit that before I get too distracted. But we have two other tables here. We have Dragon's Keep, which just runs slow. I don't really care. Let this start on up. Anyway, and then my favorite table, Skullduggery. Of course I get a 7 times multiplier when I'm trying to just demonstrate this on video. I really should just play this on stream one day. Once I get my video capture solution set up, which that should be coming later today, so who knows? If I have time, maybe. Of course, by the time this video goes up, it's going to be, you know, way later than, oh, today, so... Anyway, so if we go up here, we can kind of see, again, with that 7 times multiplier, you can do some crazy stuff with it, as we can see from the 23 million score there. I kept hitting the mystery game effect, or bonus, I guess, as it's going down over there, and it kept giving me a 7 times multiplier. So yeah, that happened, and it gave me a very crazy score. So that's really it for this video. I do want to install more games on here, but that's going to be at a later time. Again, maybe I'll stream it once I get it up and running. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this video and kind of taking another dive into the 9600 with me. So until next time, I'll see you guys later.